Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to the show, Broken Beautiful Me. I am so excited today because we have a great guest, Tiran Jackson. And I just want to tell you a little bit about him and his work before we jump right into a great conversation. So, he is a dynamic speaker, author, and visionary entrepreneur. Isn't just a survivor, he's a thriver, which I love. His own profound journey, marked by personal tragedy, loss, and triumphant resilience, is a testament to the human spirit's indomitable will to overcome. Starting his career as an engineer, Tyran was on a path to success, but life had other plans. Through transformational experiences, he discovered his true purpose, inspiring others to find their own path. Tyran's authenticity and vulnerability now serve as guiding lights for those seeking resilience, courage, and strength. Today, he doesn't just inspire, he empowers. His mission is to help you rediscover your authentic self, embrace your vulnerabilities, and set forth boldly towards your dreams. And you can connect with him on his website at rebornresilient.com, which I love. Welcome, Tyran, to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kelly, for letting me be a part of it. I'm honored to be here this morning.
So, just to begin, for our listeners who may not have encountered your work yet and want to learn more, just if you could share just a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in this inspirational work.
Oh, well, that's a heavy question. First off, I was not intended to be here. It was never my plan to be someone that not only is a professional speaker that inspires and motivates others, but actually coaches and helping those going through trauma, tragedies, or transitions in life, and help them make transformation so they can be triumphant. I started out as a nerd, as a math and science geek. And I actually started my career as an engineer. I was very good in math and science, enjoyed it in school. Got a degree in mechanical engineering. I started my career actually as a engineer for Rolls Royce, believe it or not, and was enjoying developing my career along those lines. I'm very analytical. I think about things probably sometimes too methodically, or at least I used to, and that was part of who my personality was and where I began. Now I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but sometimes we go through a transition in life where something happens and it changes the way that we view life and that we operate and that we function completely. And after going through that, I found this and discovered, or I like to say, I rediscovered a new side of myself, a side that was more empathetic, that was more understanding, but it was a result in having to overcome the obstacles that I had to face in dealing with the loss of a close loved one. And I know that that can trigger changes in so many of us, but it's what triggered the change in who I am today.
And you talked about this your incredible story of tragedy, but also for many people who read about your story, hope for how they themselves can overcome. So your book is called Choosing Resilience. All things work together for good. What a powerful title. And I just, the word choice for me really speaks to me because it definitely is. You do find yourself at these forks in the road of your life where you can choose one way or another. And it's an important fork. Um, so, but I want you to really tell us about what your book is about and what impacted you to start this work.
Yeah. So first off, everyone who's on here understands that life can throw us curveballs. Sometimes we in the times when we least expect. I'll take you guys back 6 years ago. My wife, Malika, and we were getting ready to celebrate a momentous occasion. We were celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. And like a lot of people, we decided we were going to go on a vacation to celebrate this time together. During that time, I was working for as an engineering manager for a small company in Atlanta. And my wife, Malika, she had just gotten promoted to a director level at Fortune 500 company as an HR director. And what was going on during that time leading up to it is that we were both constantly on the go. One week, she would have to travel to Chicago, and I would be here with our son, Cameron, who was 12 at the time. And it would just be the two of us, and then she would come back, and then I would have to travel for the next week for my career. And so it was one of these times where it was just really busy, really hectic. But we were truly looking forward to this time to reconnect and be together for 5 days in paradise. We decided we were going to take a trip to the Bahamas. And the day before going to the Bahamas, I dropped our son off with his uncle. And I told him, son, don't worry, I'll be back in 1 week to pick you up. And he was excited because he was going to get to spend some time getting spoiled by his uncle, getting to terrorize his cousins and getting to miss their dog, eat ice cream late at night. All of these things that kids do when their parents are not around.
Yes.
But he said, Dad, you and mom go have a great time. You guys need this. And so I left him thinking that this is going to be a great trip for us. And this is going to be a great reprieve or break for him to be able to enjoy himself. So the next day, Malika and I, we flew to the Bahamas where we were going to spend 5 days at this all inclusive resort. And the first 2 days were great. They were wonderful. We spent time at the pool, had some fruity drinks, had some time at the beach, took some phenomenal pictures. Everything was great. We were enjoying each other's company, and we were really starting to put the plan together on how we were going to move forward in the next 15 years and the 15 years after that, and so on and so forth. But on the third day, we decided we were going to do something adventurous. On the third day, we decided that we would actually leave from the resort and do an excursion to tour the island. Now, people do this all the time when they're on vacation, don't think anything about it. We got up that morning and we took a bus that stopped at a couple of different resorts to a marina. And as we got to the marina, we started thinking about what the options were for this adventure. Now, they had two trips. One of them was to do a half day tour where you spend 4 hours on the boat. You get to go a little bit around the island, but you get to come back. And then the other one was a full day tour, 8 hour trip where you get to go further along the island in the Bahamas and get to have a couple other stops, eat rest at a restaurant, do multiple things. As Malika and I were talking about our day, and what we still wanted to do, I wanted to go back golfing that afternoon. And she said, okay, well, that's fine. I can go to the spa. So we made the decision to do the half day tour. So as we bought our tickets and started walking down the pier, we had a decision to make. The half day tour was in the boat on the left. The full day tour was the boat on the right. We got on the boat on the left. 9 o'clock in the morning, boat takes off and everything seems fine. I remember sitting there with Malika. I had my arm over her shoulder and I was thinking to myself, we're in paradise. Weather's great. You can smell the sea. You can smell all the experiences related to this. And I'm thinking this is going to be the most adventurous part of this trip and it's going to be the most memorable. But 5 minutes into the ride, it became memorable for a reason that I could have wished to avoid. Um, Unbeknownst to us, on this boat, there was a fuel leak, and this fuel leak was emanating from the fuel tank. And we were sitting right above the fuel tank. And there was a small spark, and that spark led to an explosion. At
Goodness.
9:05, I found myself waking up face down on the surface of a burning boat. At 9:05, I woke up from being unconscious because my right leg was literally on fire.
Oh my
At this point in time, I don't know what happened. I don't see Malika. The only thing that I see are passengers from the second boat that wasn't too far away from me. And I could see those passengers yelling to me, get off the boat, get off the boat. And as I'm laying there, I try to push myself up, but I crumble. I try to push myself up again and I crumble again. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but my left collarbone was broken in 4 places. I had bruised ribs, fractured vertebrae, fractured pelvis, third-degree burns on my right leg, a broken right foot, and my left foot was actually severed to the point where I could see my ankle bone, blood rushing out.
God.
The only thing that I could do in that moment was take my right hand, put my fingertips in the ridges on the surface of that boat, and just try to drag myself away from the flames. I dragged myself about 3 feet until I pass out again. And then, by the grace of God, the second boat came a little bit closer. Some of the passengers on that boat actually swam over, pulled me off the boat, and carried me to their boat. And I'm grateful that they did because 3 minutes after they got me off, the second fuel tank exploded on the boat.
Oh my
So
god.
as I was going through this, I didn't know what happened. I was in shock and I didn't know where Malika was. Well, the passengers on that boat told me that her and one other passenger got thrown into a different direction into the ocean. And the third boat came and picked them up and took them away, and that I would get to see her eventually once we got to shore. Well,
Okay.
when my boat got to shore, they had already gotten to shore, Malika and the other passenger, and they already had an ambulance and they were headed to a clinic. I waited until actually a good Samaritan who had a pickup truck. They put me on a piece of plywood on the back of a pickup truck to take me to this clinic. And as I'm getting there, I'm thinking to myself and I'm praying, I hope my wife is okay. They get me to the clinic, put me on a stretcher, and wheel me in. And as they wheel me in, that's the first time I hear Malika. And as I'm being wheeled into this clinic, I can hear her moans. I can hear her, hear her agony. I can hear her suffering. And as a man, I can't do anything about it.
Ugh.
So there are 3 bays. Malika's in the first bay. There's one other passenger's in the second bay, and they put me in the third bay. And as I'm laying there, there's one doctor at this clinic. And I'm trying to make myself as still as possible, as quiet as possible, so I can hear what's going on. But as you can imagine, there's chaos in the background. What seemed like an eternity, that one doctor finally came to me and I asked him, how is my wife? How is Malika? The doctor doesn't answer my question. What he tells me is that we're sending you and this one other passenger to the good hospital, and your wife will be coming later. Now, I'm still
Mhm.
trying to listen and trying to process what's going on, but I have this sense of optimism, thinking that if they're sending me and this other passenger, then Malika must not be hurt as bad as I am, and that I will
Yes.
be blessed to see later on that afternoon. So they wrap my foot up. They put me back on a stretcher. They get me on an airplane, fly me to Nassau, where the good hospital is, get me there. I go into emergency surgery. And I wake up 6 hours later. And when I wake up in ICU, I'm starting to think that, okay, I should be able to see Malika by now. She should surely be here. Now, what they tried to do was pin what was left of my foot back to my leg at that moment. And that's
Yeah.
what the surgery was at that point in time, because that was the most severe injury that I had. As I wake up in ICU, the nurse that's in my room, when she sees me starting to move a little bit, she goes out the room and she gets the 2 doctors, and 2 doctors come in. And as soon as they come in, I ask them the most obvious question: "Where's my wife? Is Malika here
Yeah.
yet?" The 2 doctors, they look at each other in confusion and they step back out of the room. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't understand. This can't be good.
Right.
After about 5 minutes, they come back in and they tell me, Mr. Jackson, we hate to inform you, but your wife didn't make it. Your wife
Ugh.
died at the clinic. They didn't want to tell you that before they were going to fly you here and go through surgery.
Ugh.
When I think back about this, I was heartbroken. I was crying. I was hurt. What was supposed to be one of the most celebratory times in our lives together turned out
Exactly.
to be one of the most tragic moments you could ever imagine. And so
Oh,
that was the moment that I had to process the fact that the woman who I loved, my best friend, my rock, the mother of my child, the woman who I was building empires with, was taken away from me.
I am so sorry. Oh,
Thank you, Kelly.
so and from there, I mean, such a tremendous loss, but then you are facing this unimaginable grief, but you also have a long road ahead of you for your recovery, and you're a dad, you have your son to think about. Talk to us about that journey.
Well, just continuing on with that story, that next morning, I had to do something I didn't want to have to do, but I knew I had to. My son, who was unaware of what happened, I had to pick up the phone from a hospital bed in the Bahamas and call him and tell him over the phone, son, mom and dad have been in an accident and mom's never coming home again. To have to hear his voice on the other side of that phone. And it's one thing to have to give bad news to someone, but just imagine having to break your child's heart by
Yeah.
telling him that the only woman that he's ever been close to, he's never gonna get to see again. And to understand that, yes, we have a long road together. And at this point in time, I didn't even know if I was gonna survive. Later that same afternoon, as I'm laying there in the hospital bed, I can see the EKG monitor over my head. Well, like I said before, they tried to reattach what was left of my foot back to my leg, and that
Mhm.
caused infection to start going through my body. And so my body was starting to break down. So as I was laying there, I saw all my vital signs go from green to yellow to red in the matter of a
Mhm.
couple hours. And at that point, my will was truly broken. I was thinking that the next time I closed my eyes was gonna be the last time I closed my eyes. And I was gonna leave my son without a mother and a father. And so this was the truest state of despair that you could imagine. Because in my conversation with him, he asked me if I was gonna be okay. He asked me if I was all right. And I had to lie to him and tell him, son, I'm gonna be okay, that we're gonna get through this. But it's amazing how the universe works, how God was there with me. And even though I was angry about what happened, that there was a means of getting through this. And there were things that were completely out of my control, out of me, that were happening in the background to allow me to be here today. Um, I survived. I woke up that next morning and next thing I knew, I was basically getting confiscated from this hospital and flown to a level one trauma center in Florida where they were going to do whatever they could to try to save my life.
Yeah.
That trauma center, they held my family who had arrived from Tennessee at that time, that they had to do whatever they could to make sure I was still alive. And I wake up after surgery, my left leg below the knee is missing. It's amputated. I go through 9 surgeries in a matter of 5 days. But after I went through 2 days later, multiple surgeries, that's when things started to become clear to me. And I was hearing a message, and I'm a spiritual individual. God was finally, he was talking to me. And I was praying throughout this point in time. But he told me a couple of things. He told me that it was Malika's time to come home, and the sooner I could accept that, the better off I was going to be. He told me also that the normal that I knew before was not going to be my new normal. He told me that I wasn't going to go back to being an engineer. There was going to be a different path, a different journey for me to go down, and that I should be obedient and follow, even though that path wasn't clear yet. He told me if he wanted to, he could have taken my life 3 different times when that boat exploded, when my vital signs went from green to yellow to red. And even that next day after I went through multiple surgeries and my vitals were still very unstable. That could have
Mhm.
been it for me, but you pulling me through. And also that he was keeping me here for a reason. And that reason will become clear if I were obedient. But one of the most important things that came out of this message was to be resilient.
Yeah.
And came that I had a choice to make. I had a conscious choice to make. I could either feel sorry for myself, live with the circumstances, and live in pity and survive, or I could choose resilience. And by following that path, I could thrive. And it was at this moment that it became clear to me that whatever my journey, it was clear that the obstacles that I'd overcome just to still be alive at that moment were nothing compared to the obstacles I was going to have to face moving forward. And that I
Yeah.
was going to have to be able to overcome those obstacles and use that in order to be able to the, uh, reach the plan that he had for me. And one other step that I want to think about resilience that became clear to me, and I had to come to grips with this, and it wasn't something immediate, but it came over time, what my truest definition of resilience was. But resilience is not about regaining what was lost, but reshaping what still remains. And it's what you do with what still remains that controls the narrative of your life story. So having that mindset, having that understanding that things are going to happen to us, that we're going to have to face these challenges and obstacles. What's done is done, but what are you going to do with what's left and make the most out of that in order to create positive growth and propel you forward in life? So, you know, going back, I did have challenges to make as I started my physical recovery, my emotional recovery to do what was necessary to be there for my son because he was dealing with a different type of grief. He lost his mom.
Yes.
I lost my wife. We both had to adjust and adapt. But going along the journey afterwards, um, led to some transformations, not only in myself, but in him, that allowed us to grow closer together, to be able to grieve properly, or at least grieve. I won't say completely properly because outside influences want you to grieve the way they think you should grieve at times. But
Oh, yeah.
um, but yeah, but these were the lessons I had to learn along the way, and I had to learn how to not only be a father, but be a better nurturer, be a more of an emotional supporter to him, to be able to understand that what we were going through was unique in our journey, but it required us to be together and to communicate and to actually put in the effort to get past such a traumatic situation.
It's amazing how children, provide that clarity for us about and give us that motivation to dig a little deeper, and I recognize that in my own story as well with my younger son. And because it's just so important, because they deserve a happy life, right? No matter what has happened, they deserve a happy life. And so as parents, you dig that little bit deeper and try to find that courage to provide that. Um, that little whisper in your ear that told you that, you had your path and you would follow it, and you did. You listened to that. This book is proof of that you listened to that whisper from God and followed that path. And that didn't make it easier, but it gave you clarity of purpose, I suppose, for
Yes.
what you had to do. Um, so where did that take you?
Well, it took me down a completely different path that I never would have imagined. Like we talked about, Kelly, I was an engineer. I was used to designing components for aircraft engines and carburetors for different vehicles and all kinds of things that I never thought I thought that was gonna be my path in life. I thought my purpose was to excel in my career and provide for my son and my wife, and that this was what I was gonna be doing, and going through such tremendous loss. And in the weeks that followed, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I had to actually go live with my sister for about 8 weeks to physically start the recovery before I could even really dig deep into the emotional pain. But I was someone who I never really done therapy or counseling before, but I realized that between the depression, the anxiety, the survivor's remorse, the severe grief, and then just going through the adaptation of what life was going to be after, that I needed help. And
Mhm.
so, one of the most important things that I did when I was finally able to regain somewhat control of life was to find me a great grief counselor and therapist to help me learn how to process all that I lost. And also for my son too, because this is one of the things where, our mental and emotional health, it takes a severe shot when we go through this type of loss. And we are not the same people as we were before. We
No.
start to think, we can't think clearly. Simple tasks become difficult to deal with. And just the idea of just how am I going to get through this next day is something that is real. And so, I went from someone who was used to having, everything planned out, to someone who didn't know how I was going to react emotionally in any situation. And um, so the therapy and the counseling helped me understand that, and we talk about it. There is a grief journey. There is this path that we go down where we go through the multiple stages. And like I said earlier, I was had to get out of this place of being in denial. My son had to get out of this place of being in denial.
Yeah.
Remember, I told you earlier, we at that point in time, we were used to Cameron and I being at home while Malika was gone on a work trip. Well, initially in his mind, he compartmentalized it as mom was just gone on a long work.
Yes.
that was part of his way of trying to look at it and treat it. But in reality, we ended up having to get out of this state of denial and get to the place of acceptance that this is our life now. And, I say this: denial is the enemy of acceptance. And the longer that we're holding on to some of the things that are holding us back, the less likely we are to be able to move forward powerfully. And, going through the counseling and the therapy and really diving deep into the grief and really tapping into emotions that I had never tapped into before in my life. Like I said, I was an engineer. I was someone who did not, think emotionally beyond. I dealt with the facts. I dealt with what I could, scientifically come to a conclusion on. But this was different, and
Yeah.
it caused me to really have to break down who I was. Uh, this is why it was so important through my process to learn how to be authentic and vulnerable and really share what I was feeling, because it was going to be the only way that I was going to be able to be put back together in the way that I was intended to be. And it really led to growth and discovery, which when I talk about resilience, we have our breakdowns, we have our challenges, we have our obstacles, we have our setbacks, but being able not only just cope with those and come to terms with it, but use that experience to create positive growth.
Yes.
That is so critical. And I found ways in which I became really a new version of myself, which was like I said, far more empathetic, far more understanding, far more emotionally aware of not only what I was facing and dealing with, but it also unlocked the doors for me to learn be more emotionally aware of what others are facing as they're going through that process. So,
I recently talked to somebody about that type of journey when you have tragedy, and he used the phrase "the gifts of desperation," which I thought was just really impactful. Um, I love that you are talking about the benefits for counseling and therapy. Because I think, and for men in particular, and I'm not gonna pick on you, but it's difficult, to accept that you have to work through emotions like that. It's difficult to open yourself up to that because, you really have to expose that underbelly of what is at the heart of your grief, in order to move forward. And you can't find purpose and resilience until you face what has happened. Um, so I'm so thankful that, you're talking about that because I'm a big advocate for that as well. And, if you are someone who has experienced long, you're a parent of a younger child, um, you quickly realize as well that you don't have the toolbox for this because they are at a different developmental stage in their growth and development. Their brain is not fully developed as an adult would be. And so for me, I remember thinking, this is not in my wheelhouse. I have to figure this out. How am I going to help, my son in it? And did you feel that as well? Like that, for his age and development, that he needed to be able to speak freely, to somebody who wasn't you, because that was my experience.
Yes, definitely, definitely. There's definitely value in someone who understands how to communicate to a child at that age, and just in period, because the parent child relationship is different, because sometimes our kid, and keep this in mind, my son was 13, 12, 13 at that time. At that age, that's sort of when kids start pulling away from their parents and start wanting to talk to their friends more and keeping things, you know, as they're starting to grow up and find themselves, or at least develop started their personality and getting influence from different places. And so we had our relationship, but it's also good to have some independent person who understands sort of what they're feeling, that they can talk to comfortably. Now, my son was pretty introverted and didn't really want to talk about it initially. But after forming that relationship and really being able to learn how to express sort of what he was thinking and what he was feeling, you could see that he was starting to get closer to that level of acceptance. That hey, it's dad and I now, and we have to move on. We still honor, his mom, but that it was going to be different. And the sooner that he could adapt to the reality of that situation, the better chance we had of getting through it in a positive manner. And this isn't like a one-time thing. I mean, we were doing this on a weekly basis. And then we also, between he and I, we would talk about certain things. But for a long time, he didn't want to know details about what.
Yeah.
And I completely had understood that and respect that. And so, because so we have to understand that we're not always ready for that reality, especially when they're young like that. But at the same time, there were times when I was truly weak and I didn't know how I was gonna go on. And he exemplified a level of resilience that showed strength to me, that helped me be able to regain strength and focus on what was important. And so yeah, so the relationship with my son was critical in being able to, one, for me to move forward, but also making sure that took the right steps in order to try to best enable him to move forward through his loss without it having a negative effect on his development. So
So so from there, I mean, it sounds like that, you both have put that work in. And I actually it's funny what you were mentioning about um not being ready to face certain things. And I recall in from the therapist that we had experience with, I remember ruminating about this one particular thing, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, that all of a sudden there's one particular part of this very big tragedy in your life that you start to fixate on a little bit. And I was worried that I was really backpedaling in my progress because I was really sitting with my grief and doing the work. And her comment to me was, maybe you're fixating on it because your brain is letting you know that you're finally ready to look at this piece of it.
yeah, yeah,
And I thought, "Hmm." She said, "So don't look at this as a backpedaling thing. Don't look at it as a weakness. This means you are ready." And I thought that that was so valuable and generous of her to say, um, because a lot of times when we're going through this, people don't realize that sometimes the darker days doesn't mean setback. The darker days means, okay, I have to, this is the point in the journey where I have to look at this piece of it. And that's okay. I'm still okay.
right. I know. I agree with that, Kelly. I definitely think that and you're spot on that there were certain elements that I didn't want to face, that my son didn't want to really talk about or face. But it's funny. It's not a linear process going through the grief
No.
and all. But for us to heal, we have to be we have to break down. And I think what you're talking about here is some of the things that the stop signs, the things that we know, okay, they're going to break us down. But as we dive deeper into it and feel that pain, feel that burden of it, but face it and process that it actually does help us move, little by little forward on that journey of becoming whole again.
Right.
And I talk to people about how one of the things, and I know we're getting into grief a little bit more in detail, Kelly, and I hope it's not an issue, but
No.
when you see it in other people after you've been through it, you start to see where people are ignoring or compartmentalizing certain elements that they need to address. And the time it's a different timeline for everyone, I understand. But I also can sense when somebody is conveniently not going after what they need to in order to reach that next step of healing. And so I think you have two people. You have those who understand that this is going to hurt. And I've got to be courageous to go ahead and deal with this grief and this pain in this situation. Or those who just are letting life happen to them and hoping that they are going to heal naturally, organically. but don't want to put in that grief work to actually face that situation, that reality, that pain that's there. So, um, it's I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but that is part of what I've seen and learned and experienced myself.
Yes. So let's so what would you say, I'm often asked when I chat with people, like, where do I start with this? And I know that you are doing some remarkable work. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the work that you're doing now based on the lessons that you have learned from your experiences. So what would you say to someone who's in their own dark night right now? Like if they come up to you and they say, "Where do I start? How do I get through this?" What would you say?
So one of the most important elements of me finally actually establishing a baseline and starting to understand my emotions with this, and just to give a little context, for about, like I said, 6 to 8 weeks after the accident, I was limited in physical mobility. I was laying in a bed, and I would get pushed in a wheelchair to a recliner and sit there for 10 hours only to go back to bed. So I had a lot of time where I couldn't really do a lot of different things. One of the most important things that I did during that time, as I mentioned, my right arm was perfectly fine after everything. I started writing and journaling, and in going through that, and it hurt too because I started reflecting back on some of the moments that Malika and I had that were happy, some of the times that were, just things that we experienced together, and it would lead me to tears. I would be crying. I would be writing and crying at the same time because I felt like this loss was so great, so heavy, and I never get to experience it again. But what that did was it started to crack open the door of me being aware of my emotions and starting the grief process. And so um this allowed me to reflect, and I think that level of reflection on the good times that we had with somebody is one of the most important things. But when we take that pencil and we actually put it on paper, it becomes real. And so when we start to see that, that would be one of the first steps I would say for anybody once you really want to fully grasp uh, how you're going to move forward. First, you got to get some of that pain out there on paper. So that's a
And
some.
and it's funny, if people haven't, used journaling before as a tool to work through things, you don't really realize that at the end of a writing session, when you just let things spill out and journals, you never have to show another person. Journals, you can turn a journal into a book, or you can just turn it into your own personal way of working through emotions, and then if you wanna toss it afterwards, you're more than welcome to, but I don't think people realize once you finish writing it down that you have actually emotionally worked through that event as you're writing it down, and it's proven in science, right? As it changes your neural pathways as you're working through this type of loss. Um, so what are some of the most common roadblocks that you see people erect? So when you go and you're working with people, um, what are the things that you have to help them see from a new perspective? Some of those roadblocks, "Well, I'd love to do it this way, Tyran, but I'd love to help, but I can't. I wanna move forward, but." I mean, we've all done it. I'm not just saying that certain people do that. I've done that in my own life and progress. So how do you approach that in your work?
So one of the things in my coaching that I like to do is, and that I well, some of the common roadblocks that come up. One is that, I think a lot of people think that they are further along their grief process than they really are, and they start to try to get back to life sooner than what they should. Go back to work, start to do certain things that they were used to doing before. But the reality is, you're not going to be the same person as you were before. And
Mhm.
so, what I realize happens is it starts to stunt their progress through the grieving cycle, and then they're not they they start to have um, repeated patterns that pull them back when
Mm,
certain triggers pop up. And I think that part of this is because they have convinced themselves that they have started healing further along than what they have. But then the other part of it too that I think complements that is that I think that and I want to, they get bad advice. And what I mean by bad advice is some of the people who are closest to us don't understand what we're going, and
mm,
they want to project their approach towards the grief that you're feeling on on you, the way that they would handle it. But they don't understand all the emotions. The times that you wake up in the middle of the night, you realize that person that you've been sleeping with is no longer there. The times that you realize where, you know, you go into your son's room and then you realize that he's not coming. These are things that are unique to what we have to experience, and we have to go through that process. Not saying that all advice from others is bad, because that is not what I'm trying to say. But when somebody is telling you to do something that goes against your healing, and they don't know any better, but
yeah.
it's just one of those things that once people start following that, I see them starting to, after making some progress, definitely having setbacks because of the relationship that they have with some of these other influences, other people in their lives. And just being able to parse through what makes sense versus what is just, advice and what somebody else would do, I think is one of the biggest obstacles and challenges. And then, sometimes, people start falling off the consistency of doing that journaling, doing
Yep.
that deep shadow work of what they need to in order to fully get past that pain. And when that happens, then you got to get back into the routine and habit of it if you're going to move forward.
You definitely do. And I think too, this is why I think your work is so important. Because, some of that advice that you talk about, and people are very well meaning, but you're right. Our grief, everybody's grief is as individual as a fingerprint. It's based on their relationship with the loved one they have lost. And grief, you mentioned earlier, grief is not in this linear line. I always kind of look at grief like that set of Christmas lights that you find at the bottom of the bin that's been there for a couple of years and it's all knotted and tied. Like that's what it kind of feels like sometimes. Um, but but we've also, as a society, you look at corporate employers and you get 3 days of bereavement leave. You look at how we have, as corporations, handled post-COVID world, So many people have lost very important people in their lives, and, it's unresolved grief because as a world, we were all locked away and separate from each other, and one of the things that we know that is good for us following a loss is not disconnecting from community. And so this is why this work is so important, is because it's not only talking to the people who have lost individuals, but also talking to the people who are leading individuals who have lost people, or who are leaders who have lost people themselves, and giving them permission to really sit with their grief so that they can find that resilience. That's your it seems to me that that's the work that you are doing right now, and it's so important.
Yeah, I think it's something that may not, it may not be the 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 buzzword, or or maybe the way I see it is one of those things that people don't realize is important until they need it, until
Yes.
they experience something. And there are definitely, ways to build awareness and build their resilience. So when something happens, and I haven't met a person who has not experienced something that's rocked them in their lives. So we're
Yeah.
all going to have to deal with it. Some of us may start off better equipped than others. And really, some of the challenges that we face in our experiences through our life can prepare us if we utilize those lessons properly. But when we have no grasp or no understanding of it, then when something does happen, it can really cause people to go through mental and emotional breakdowns and not be able to bounce back from it. And those are sad stories to hear, but that's part of the reality. So in going through resilience training and preparation, what we're doing is preparing people to one understand how to communicate with those who are, going through that bereavement or that loss or dealing with that emotional pain that they're struggling with, but also how to properly address some of the issues that teams are facing, give perspectives from leadership on how important it is to deal with emotions with life. And you got to keep in mind, Kelly, I come from a background where it was essentially a bunch of robots with no emotion. Oh, to be on the other side of this now and what I do in my work now, it definitely highlights the fact that, like you said, people expect for you to deal with the traumatic loss and then be back in the office 3 days later. That is
Yes,
just not and if this is a key critical part of your life, how are you supposed to bounce back from that so fast?
right.
Understanding that we have to have uh, a certain degree of empathy, and a certain soft spot for what people are going through because we are all going through something. Is something that I think is so important for us to really have to grasp and understand in this world. So I hope to be a beacon of light and show people that yes, with the right um, strategy, the right approaches, you can bounce back and be greater than where you started as a result of some of the pain that you've gone through, and use it to leverage and find your purpose. But we also have to be compassionate and understand that when we see others going through that, that we that we don't stunt their recovery and growth from it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So what is the most surprising thing that you've learned about yourself?
The most surprising thing that I've learned about myself. Um, I've learned that um, it is okay to be emotionally open and available to show people how they can do the same and how doing so leads to creating a life of even greater fulfillment. I find joy and pleasure in realizing that I can help other people who are going through a pain, not identical, but similar to some of what I've experienced, help them make that progression to where they can manage their grief and their emotions. Um, I never would have thought that was me. I never would have thought that that would be something that I would be doing. So that is one of the most surprising aspects. Um, and there is plenty more. I can go deeper if we need, but yeah, that was
No, I mean, it's just I find it's so beautiful that, when we go through these things, we end up kind of doing a bit of self-reflection after, and we're like, "Oh, I didn't expect to be here." I feel quite the same way. I come from a science background too as a registered nurse, and, um, you know, I always say, "Oh, talking about this woo-woo stuff," but I found through my that this saved me, all this stuff about gratitude and using gratitude for growth and resilience. So building on that gratitude theme. So, as we've discussed, I have a global gratitude group called Just One Little Thing. And it's we have people from all over the world in there, and they show up and they just say what they're thankful for. So I might say, for example, this morning, I'm thankful for the changing leaves in the south, which is awesome for me because I grew up in the north. Um, a good cup of tea, it always makes me happy. And I've said this before on the podcast, but I have 2 Labrador retrievers, and they've behaved so far in this podcast and have not decided to add some feedback. So those are all one little things that I am very thankful for today. What are you thankful for today?
good question. So I got up and I worked out this morning, and one of the things I'm thankful for as I mentioned before, I'm an amputee. I went through a period of time where the doctors didn't know if I'd be able to. They said I'd be able to walk again, but it would probably take 10 months after the accident for me to be able to do that. I was walking 3 months later after the accident, and I was able to do things where if you would not know that I'm an amputee if I had pants on. So I say that I'm grateful to be able to not just walk, but to be able to function like
Yeah.
a normal person and be able to do that without pain, without discomfort, without awkwardness. And I'm blessed in that regard. Um, and so that's one of the things that I am very grateful for. I continue to be. Um, I'm also grateful um, for people who pour into me, people who give hope and create smiles in my life, such as yourself, Kelly. To be able to have opportunities to talk with people and feel like that what we are doing as a whole is something positive in this universe, and to be encouraged that we're making a difference is something that I'm grateful for. So, and I believe in gratitude. I have a gratitude journal, and I believe we could go on for days because there's so much for us to be grateful for, in spite of what may have happened to us. Kelly,
Hello. I'm
hey,
not what happened there. I think I don't know. We had some sort of internet issue. Uh, so we can just fix that with the edit. So you just finished saying what you were thankful for. You were just finishing that up. Um, so I'll just get that little piece edited out. I apologize.
no worries, no worries.
Um, so before we close out this fantastic conversation, I don't want it to end, to be honest with you. Um, I just want you to tell our listeners how they can find you and your work and your book because it's so important that people get your book.
Yes. So for anybody wanting to get my book, please go to choosingresilience.net. You'll be able to get a personally signed autographed copy from me of my book and learn a little bit more about just how important it is to make that conscious choice to be resilient in order to move forward. So that's where you can find the book. My business, my platform is called Reborn Resilient, and you can go to rebornresilient.com and find me. And you can find me over all the social medias under Tiran Jackson Official, or just look up Reborn Resilient and you'd be able to.
I actually love your Instagram. You have great content on your Instagram, your little short videos and stuff. It's really inspiring, and I love. So at the end of the day, you guys, you need to subscribe to his Instagram because you can scroll through and just get so inspired with these little clips. It's perfect.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that, Kelly. Yeah, I definitely keep the realize that we need sometimes we need push and motivation in order to keep going,
Yeah.
and I help people who are really struggling with that. In order to, I don't know if you see my core values up here, but these are some of the things that I real, and this was part of my journey too, building that consistency, having that right attitude, understand the importance of executing. These are steps in order to change the habits that go from who we once were to who we are supposed to be. And so part of that is definitely reflected in what I share throughout. So yeah, please follow my Instagram, you'll be able to see more and get more from there.
Thank you so much, Tarian. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope that you will come back again and speak with us more.
Kelly, anytime. Let me know when.
Okay, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.